Hi, good afternoon everybody. Sorry, I'm a couple of minutes late there. So in this afternoon's tutorial, I'm going to talk you through cutting out pattern pieces on slippery fabrics like polyester or viscose. Of course, you could do this pattern in other fabrics. So anything that's drapey. It does actually say on the instructions you can use knits, so it's entirely up to you what kind of feel you want for this. I'm going for quite a long, dramatic kimono, so I've lengthened mine, and I want it to be really drapey and really floaty. But you could do this in like a nice lightweight knit and have it more as like a cardigan. It's a very adaptable pattern. It's very simple. It's 2 pattern pieces, so you could definitely play around with this and make it different, lengthen the sleeves and stuff like that. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut out the pattern pieces. So I'm just going to flip you around. So I've just laid my pattern out, hoping that you kind of can see enough of that. Let's manoeuvre that camera. So I've laid my pattern pieces out, and I've just laid it on the fabric as you would buy it. So sorry if this isn't a particularly good angle of me. So because I've extended mine at the bottom, so I've probably added a good 6 inches to mine, front and back, so it's using a little bit more fabric. So this is on 1.5 meters. And what I've done is I've just kept it as it's folded in half. So this is 60-inch wide fabric. So if you've gone for a narrower fabric, you'll obviously need more in length. And it probably takes, if I wasn't going to add anything onto it, probably takes about 1.25 meters. So I've done size 14, but you can still see there is a little bit of movement on fabric. So even if you did a slightly bigger size, I still think you'd fit it on 150. 1.5 meters of fabric, 150 centimetres. So 2 pieces, you've got the back piece which is cut on the folds, and you've got the front which is 2 open pieces. If you've got a directional print, then you will need to think about the layout, so you will need more fabric. So my front pieces are upside down, but because of the nature of my print it doesn't matter. So I've put the back piece on the fold, and you want to make sure that it's really nicely placed on the fold. Now I've gone for polyester crepe for mine, because it's probably a little bit more tricky than viscose. Viscose has got natural fibres in it, so when you iron it, it tends to do what you want it to do, whereas this one won't listen to a word you're saying, so it's a good opportunity to show me how to use the starch spray. So it's a very fine fibre, so I'm going to use glass head pins because I don't want to pull any of those fibres. It's a really tight weave. So I'm not going to put loads of pins in, I'm just going to put some pins in the key places, like on the folds, on the neckline and on the corners. And then the underarm curve is another good place to put them. So just literally a handful of pins, and I'm going to be using a rotary cutter for this. So I'll just get that pinned on. So the biggest danger when you're cutting slippery fabrics, and especially if you've got lots of pattern pieces and a big expanse of fabric, is that you're going to move and distort the pieces. So as soon as you move the fabric will move like crazy. So the best thing to do is try and keep it as stable as possible. So if you've got a large cutting mat, this is absolutely the time to use it. A rotary cutter will mean that you are putting pressure on your pieces and you are not pulling it with your scissors. If you're cutting something like this out with scissors, then you're going to find that manoeuvring the fabric and pulling it is going to distort it. So if you pull a little bit of fabric from one side and then try and pull it back, you're not going to get an accurate pattern. Now obviously it's a really simple shape, so it doesn't matter, but if you're doing stuff with more panelling or specific shape, then you need to be more aware of this. So normally I would say chunk it up. Like if you've got some bodice pieces, chunk them up and do it smaller, and then you can do them on, if you've got a smaller mat, then you don't have this massive expanse of fabric. Obviously these are really big pieces, so you've got to work with it. So really make sure you've got a nice sharp blade on your rotary cutter, lots of pressure with your fingers, and a really nice crisp cut. So front piece is in 2 halves, and that doesn't need to go on fold, but the back piece does. So I've pre-cut mine out, and then I can crack on with the sewing, but top tips are big surfaces, cutting mats, rotary cutters. And if you're a little bit scared of putting pins in, you can always use pattern weights as well, or things to weight it down, but I do think pins will help on the corners and things like that, just in case there is any little bits of movement. So if there's any questions, I shall pick them up now. So I'm hoping that there's let's have a quick flick. Not sure. Don't think there's any questions there, so that's good. So I've got my pattern pieces ready cut out, and I've also just whizzed them on the overlocker so that I don't need to do any overcasting. Sorry, just let me get this tripod right. So I've got some scraps. I'm going to play around with my scraps and make sure my stitches are happy, my fabric is sewing nicely before I actually go onto my kimono. And the actual sewing for it is really quite straightforward. So changes to things you might do are cutting with a rotary cutter rather than obviously scissors. Using glass head pins because they're nice and sharp and fine and they won't pluck any of your fibres. So because viscose and polyester crepes is very fine, I'm also going to use a fine needle. So if you rely heavily on your needle threader, unfortunately this isn't going to be an opportunity when you can use it. So I've gone for a 60, which is a very fine needle, which obviously means there's a very fine eye. So you just insert it like any other needle, flat side to the back, pop it as high up as it will go in your machine. And now I need to try and thread this needle without it taking 10 minutes. I'm going to apologise in advance. Oh my goodness. I'm not a very good angle to do this, and then if I move, I'm going to bash that tripod. Oh my goodness. Right. This is the first battle. We've got over the battle of printing the darn pattern and sticking it together. This is your next one. I'm sure everyone's feeling my pain right now. I promise this tutorial will contain more than me threading a needle. Oh, it's just not having any of it. Oh, and we're through. Oh my goodness. For a scary moment there, I thought I was never going to thread that needle. Just need to pray now that doesn't come unthreaded for the rest of the making the kimono. So nice fine pins, nice fine needle. Oh, I can breathe a little. Come on, internet. Right, so I've got a little bit of scrap and I'm just going to test my stitches. So I'm going to use just a normal, regular, straight stitch and just see how that looks. So I'm going to I'll put a couple of layers of fabric together to mimic what I'm doing and see how that is looking. So. So those stitches are looking absolutely fine. I'm just going to pull back my seams and just check. Yeah, it's all good. So just a nice regular straight stitch. So my stitch length is about 2.2 millimetres. So I'm quite happy with that. I'm going to keep those scraps there for when I'm testing my my iron to make sure that I'm not going to accidentally melt my fabric. Because it is 100% polyester, it will melt at a slightly lower temperature. So I'm just going to move this stuff out of the way. I've got a bit more surface space to show you laying out the pattern. So it is a very simple pattern, which is brilliant. So it means that you've only got a few seams. So I'm choosing the option that's got a vent in it. So the vent is basically a nice big sort of slit up the side, and it just again gives the garment more movement. So I'm going to show you how to do that, because it's one of the kind of extra things in there. Oop, sorry, I keep touching the tripod. So I'm going to lay my front pieces, my front pieces over my back piece, and I'm matching up the side seam. So like I said, I've just overlocked mine just so I don't have to do any overcasting on this tutorial, and then I can crack on with doing the sewing. So I'm laying those edges on top of each other. So I'm just matching that seam all the way through the curve of the arm, and again I'm using my glass head pins. So I'm just going to put a few pins in around that curve, because that'll probably be the thing that tends to move a little bit more. I want to definitely match up. And then I'm going to put a double pin at my notch mark. So when you're cutting this pattern out, you will see that there is a notch mark for that vent, and I'm going to stop sewing there. So I'm just going to put a couple of pins in there just to remind myself to stop, because it's very easy. I get carried away and merrily sew past where I'm supposed to be doing. But obviously I want that nice vent, like I said, that just gives it that nice dramatic feel. So that's one side seam on, and then I'm going to do my other side seam. If you weren't going for the vent version and you were just doing a simple side seam, you would just literally go all the way from your underarm seam all the way around and all the way down. So I've made things, like I said, just a little bit trickier, but it just gives me an opportunity to show you how you would do that. So again, I'm just going to match my seams up around that curve under the arm. I'll try and keep my eyes on questions. And then I'm just going to look out for that notch mark. So I've just marked mine in air erasable pen. So I'm looking for that purple marker. But obviously most of you, if you're doing notch, would probably put a couple of snips, a little snip into your seam allowance. I just thought that would be easy to find. So the seam allowance on this pattern is 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch. So I'm just going to be looking for my 1 centimetre marker on my sewing machine. And of course, I'm going to start with 3 stitches forward and 3 stitches backwards. So the sizing for this pattern, obviously, because it's really loose fitting, you don't need to be sort of too precious when you're measuring yourself. I measured my hip measurement, which is my widest part, although my bust and waist measurements were a couple of sizes down. I've gone for that bigger size just because I quite like that kind of floaty and dramatic feel. And then when I get to that double pin, obviously I know I need to stop because that's the area for my vent. So my vent's going to be much bigger than yours because I've added that extra length. I think this machine might need to go and see Kieran. This presser foot doesn't want to stay up. So that's one side seam and we'll do the other. So I'm just going to twizzle my fabric round and I'm going to start at the vent this time. So you can see I'm just running over my pins. I've popped them going adjacent to the direction of my fabric. And because it is slippery and it wants to move, I want to keep those pins in really whilst I sew, or even maybe to the last minute, just to keep those edges together. Because it's slippy, they will kind of slip and slide away from each other. And again, just finishing with those 3 reverse stitches at the end. So that is the underarm construction. Believe it or not, that's the main construction for the kimono. So now I've got my sleeves together, I'm going to match up my shoulder sleeves. So it's the shoulder and the sleeve kind of all in one. So it's this bit of the kimono. So obviously I don't want to be sewing here because that's where my arm's going to pop out. So again, I'm just matching those edges. I trim my overlocker threads off, very untidy. So because the fabrics are slippery and they will move, I tend, like I tend to do with jersey, to match the ends of my seams up and then kind of stretch to fit in the middle. So sometimes, because it's slippy, you can end up feeling like you're pushing all of that fabric along as you're pinning. And then when you get to the end, you've got like a little bit of unevenness. And it's just because the fabric is being a bit naughty. So I've pinned the ends, I've pinned in the middle, and then I'm just stretching out and popping another couple of pins in to there. And again, I'm just putting them the opposite way to the direction I'm going to be sewing in, so I can just roll over them. It will just help me keep them into place. And then I'm going to do the same with the other shoulder seam. Oops, sorry, I'm wobbling you all. So again, just matching that top neckline up. And then that sleeve edge. And then just a stretch to fit in the middle, and I'm going to put a pin in the middle. So if anyone's got any questions, please fire away. I'm kind of trying to keep half an eye on my phone for if anyone's got any queries. Obviously I'm doing this with a polyester crepe, so I've just got a nice straight stitch, but if you were doing this with a stretch fabric, you'd need to have the appropriate stitches, sort of stretch stitch or a zigzag, and of course the appropriate needle, like a ballpoint or a stretch needle. So again, we're 1 centimetre seam allowance, so I'm just going to run it all the way down that side. Just keeping those edges together. So I'm not pulling out the fabric, but I'm just keeping a little bit of tension in it, just to keep it really nice and straight on that line. Because obviously if you give it kind of any leeway, it just kind of wants to move away. And then again, when we get to the end, I'm going to do my 3 reverse stitches. We'll zip those pins out. And we'll do my other shoulder seam, and then that is my kimono fully constructed, and we can go on to applying the satin binding for that beautiful neck finish, pressing and stitching the vent, and hemming the sleeves. So I can just see that someone's asked about what the difference are between stretch and ballpoint. So stretch and ballpoint needles are suitable for different fabrics. Ballpoint needles are more suitable for natural fibres, for like cotton jersey and cotton sweatshirting and more stable fabrics. And stretch needles are more suitable for really stretchy fabrics like lycras and swimwear, gym activewear. And for any fabrics that have got high man-made contents, like polyester jerseys, brushed jerseys, that kind of thing. I have done a video, I did a video on Tuesday that kind of talks about what the best needles for which fabrics, and also we have them on our website next to every product of the kind of needles that we recommend for the best outcomes. So, because I'm not doing a stretch fabric, of course, I've just got a universal needle. So, yes, Gillian, I overlocked the edges before I started sewing, and that was purely just to save time on this tutorial. So once you've done those constructive edges, what you would be doing if you'd not done that overlocker is overlocking your seam edges, but of course I've just preempted that and just done that already. So you can either do them together and push your seam allowances to one side when you iron, or do each edge separately and then press them flat, which is what I'm going to do now. So you just bring my ironing board in. Let's see if that's... So I'm going to press my seams open where I've got that vent. So again, because I've got a polyester fabric and I want to check that everything I'm doing is right, so I'd hate to cut all that fabric out, sew it and then melt it with the iron. So I've got a fairly low iron temperature on there. So for wool and silk, so you might have a setting of synthetics. There we go, I can't read it upside down. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to test it on that scrap so that I don't melt it. But I want to make sure that it is going to be effective. So let's just... So it's not listening to a word I'm saying there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some starch spray. And this is the kind of thing you can get on the laundry aisle in a supermarket. For about £1. I think I got this from Morrison's, and it will just give some crispness and it will keep it stable. So if you are really struggling with jerseys, well, you can use this and it stops it curling, but I'm going to use it for this one for my hemming and for my seams. So I'm just going to give it a good shake, and then a light spritz, probably about 15 centimetres or so away. I'm not going crazy and using loads of it, and I'm just going to give that a press. Might need to just slightly raise the temperature of my iron, but I'm just going to do it cautiously. So now that fabric is sitting much flatter and it feels a little bit rigid because it's got that starch on, but as soon as you move the fabric or wash it, that starch will just come straight out. If anyone's had a job where they've got uniform, then they will be very au fait with the starch spray. So I'm just going to press that underarm seam first. I'll move the ironing board and then you can see. So I don't want to get too close and I don't want to sort of totally saturate my fabric. So I'm just going to do a little bit of time because I've only got a small ironing board. And it's just allowing me just to keep those seams open. So I'm going to extend my ironing down. So I'm going to spray a bit more starch spray on there because my vent is going all the way down to the bottom hem. Like I said, mine is longer because I've extended mine to make it, my kimono, to make it a bit more dramatic. So I've got longer to press. So I'm just pressing the same amount of my seam allowance. So I'm looking at my seam allowance here. Sorry, you can't see that. Your seam allowance on the side seam of the garment is my reference. I'll just keep nudging that temperature up a little bit until I get the effect that I want. So you need the iron to be hot enough so that it heats that starch up and sort of dries it crisp. You don't want a soggy kimono. There we go, and it's starting to do what I want there and keep it nice and crisp. So I'm going to put a couple of pins in just to keep it held, but I don't need too many because that starch spray is doing what I want it to do now. And then I need to do it all down my other side. This is the most ironing I've done in a very long time, so I apologise because I'm not a natural ironer. I've got to admit it's not something I like doing a lot of. So just all the way up the other side. Again, I'm going to try and keep my eyes for questions. Hopefully this all feels fairly straightforward. So if you've got like tunic top patterns, this is a nice way of, this is the kind of same sort of principle as you'd probably do on a tunic top. If you're like me and you've got wider hips than you do waist and bust, it just means you can kind of let the fabric out to the side a little bit more, and gives you more room for your bottom. In a top, of course. Lovely, so that's nice and crisp now. Again, put a couple of pins in there. Just keep all that fabric where I want it. And then I'm going to whiz my ironing board out the way. So, a little bit like doing a hem really is this. So I'm going to start at the bottom edge of my kimono, and I'm going to do it from the wrong side of the fabric, but you could equally do that from the right side of the fabric. And I'm going to try and get my needle, so my thread, so it's sort of sitting fairly close to this edge. It's going to hold everything back. That's not going to kind of roll, but I don't want to be too close to the edge that I'm kind of potentially going to miss the fabric. So trying to find the right sort of seam allowance on there. I'm at the most bizarre angle. It's really not that easy. Right, so just going to keep my eye on that line, and then it's nice and consistent. And I'm coming all the way up one side of my vent, and then when I get to the top, I'm going to be doing some pivoting. So when I get to the point where I'm at my side seam, I'm going to go a little bit further up, so probably about 1/2 centimetre up my seam. I'm going to drop my needle, so if you've got a button or you're using your hand wheel, I'm just going to lift it and have a little peek. And then I'm going to twist my fabric around a 90-degree angle. I'm going to go right across my seam. And I'm sort of counting how many stitches it takes me to get to the middle, and I want to then count out the other side so it's nice and equal. That's right. And then again, drop the needle and lift and twist, and I'm going to come all the way back down the other side of the vent. So a little bit like you're doing a gigantic hem, really. So I've not done any reverse stitching on that because I'm going to catch this bottom edge in my hem in a minute, and I think probably be a little bit too fiddly, or it might catch some of that fabric. So that's how your vent will look. She should have like a nice sharp rectangle there at the top, and then obviously it finishes those edges off at the side. So if you didn't have a vent, you could just completely skip that step, and you would be on to adding the binding to the neckline and doing the hems. So I've got my pink version to show you. Sorry, there is so much fabric with kimonos, it really doesn't lend itself well to a tiny little phone screen. So the reason I've added bias binding to the neck edge is because around that curve of your neck, so at the back of the neck, over the shoulder seam, and then down onto the front you've got a lovely curved edge. So in the instructions it tells you to do double turn hem. If you try and do that on a curve, it's virtually impossible. Even if you did do it, you'd probably find that all the fabric, because it's twisting and there's lots of stress on it, is really rippled. So by adding that binding, it gives it a really nice, neat neck finish. So it sits on your neckline really flatly, and you maintain that lovely curve. But then also you've got that nice finish with the satin bias. So if you are wearing it and it's slightly breezy and that sort of falls forward, you get that nice sort of flash of the satin bias binding, and it gives it, I think, like a real luxury feel. So I'm going for a bright yellow. So I could have gone for cream or black, or even maybe that muted tone, but I'm going to go for yellow because I want it to be nice and bold and really stand out. So what I'm going to do, rather than doing my whole neck edge and risking boring the pants off you all, I'm going to do just a little scrap, and then you get the idea. So what you need to do is you need to measure from the very tip of the front of your kimono all the way around, over the shoulder seams, around the neck edge, and then all the way down to the bottom. So that will be the length of bias you need, and I would always just add a little bit of extra on either side, just so it's you're not going to get to the end and think, oh Christ, I've not got enough. So I'll probably need between 2 and 3 meters, like I said, because I've got a very long kimono, but maybe 2.5, that kind of thing would be necessary for most people's kimonos. So I've got my neck edge, or my pretend neck edge, and I'm going to take the length of bias. Get that bit of sticker off because it was a new roll, and I'm just going to lightly press out one of the folded edges. So you don't necessarily have to do this with satin binding. I just think it's a nice effect. It looks nice because of this sort of nice sheen to it. But you could use cotton binding if you were using a cotton or a natural fibre. This is a polyester because it's satin, and I think it kind of it suits this project well. So I'm taking the edge that I've unfolded, and I'm going to pin the raw edge of the binding to the raw edge of the kimono. So like I said, I would start from the bottom edge and work my way up over my shoulders, around the neck and down the other side, and I'm just going to put a few pins in there, keeping that together. So the slippy bias binding and the slippy fabric will both slip around. So again, just you might want to be quite pin heavy with this bit to make sure that you are keeping those edges together. So this is on the right side of your fabric. So right sides to right sides. And then I'm going to stitch in that groove, so I'm going to stitch in that fold line. So because this is a sample, I haven't done my reversing, but I would recommend doing that. And you're just keeping your eye on that line, that your needle's going nicely into your seam line. So, for most of your kimono, you've got lovely, nice straight edges and only a little dip of a curve at the back of the neck. So on the back of the neck, when you turn your satin binding over onto the wrong side, if you feel like the fabric is under tension and it feels like it's stretching, it's twisting or rippling or giving you creases, what you need to do is just snip into your binding and the neck edge, not quite to the stitches but pretty close, at like sort of centimetre increments, half centimetre, something like that. And then so you do the same under an armhole, anything with a sharp curve, and then just check that it's sitting nicely and flatly. So the next thing, you might want to press this with your iron. depending on what kind of fabric you've got and how well it's behaving. But you want the satin binding and the join between the satin binding and your fabric sit just on that edge. And you're just going to put some pins in to keep it all in place. So a bit of starch spray and an iron might just keep it from pressing and just keep it all in place. So really stretch that out. I just need one more pin here. It's not. So this is obviously going to be on your neckline. It's going to be the most visible, kind of noticeable thing because it's going to sit right across your chest. So really take your time with this, with the pins, and making sure that you are getting a nice finish on that. And just check the other side again. You've not got any ripples in there. It's sitting nice and flat. That edge is looking nice. So again, I'm going to be sewing from the wrong side, and I want to place my needle really, really close to this edge now, probably about 1 millimetre or 2. So I'm going to move my needle position over so it's really nice and close. Oh, no, I'm just moving I'm changing my stitch now. I'm just going to hover that down. I think I can get a bit closer, like that. And I'm just going to take it nice and slow and really take my time on making sure that's nice and even. So you've got that binding on one side, and then obviously that nice neat finish coming down the front edge or the neck edge of your kimono. So if you're going for a contrast like I've done, then you're going to need to be a little bit braver because your stitches are going to be visible. So it's entirely up to you what you do there. Obviously it probably would have been a safer choice for me to go black, but I think that little flash of yellow will be nice. So that is the neck edge. We've done the vents. The last thing to do is do the hems. So you will need to hem that bottom edge of your kimono, and you'll also need to hem your sleeve edges. So I have, oh my God, there's so much fabric. Where is my sleeve? Here it is. So I've gone round with an overlocker, so you could overcast it and do a single turn hem, but I think it'd be nice to have a double turn hem. So I'm just going to grab my ironing board back again. And if you've got a sleeve attachment for your ironing board, if you've got one of those little doobrays, the little thin arms that you think, God, when am I ever going to use that? This will be ideal for this. So again, I'm just going to put my bit of starch spray on. And I'm going to put a little bit going up the seams, so I want to lay those nice and flat as well. I'm going to fold that back. So I'm measuring about 1.5 centimetres. So obviously, what you want to do is, I know I've made this pattern before, I'm quite happy with the sleeves, but if you wanted them a little bit shorter, then now would be the time to just try your kimono on and have a little look how it's looking. So it's a really nice, neat, tidy hem. I like this hem for all sorts of things, not just for crepes. I tend to do it from doing anything that's sort of cotton or woven. So I've folded back about 1.5 centimetres. I'm just pressing that down, and I've just pushed my seams on both the shoulder and the underarm sleeve seam flat. noticing, just crank it up a little bit more, keep nudging that temperature, and then just turn it over and make sure I've got a nice even seam on the other side, hem on the other side. So these kimonos are absolutely ideal for this time of year, whether you just want to kind of cover your shoulders from the sun, or whether you want to be cool and don't want to, but you're not sort of keen on having like your arms, top of your arms out, and your back and your neck and stuff like that. They just they're nice and light, and they'll obviously just give you that bit of coverage. But also good if you don't know what the hell the weather's doing and you don't want to be cold. It just gives you that little bit of protection against the wind. So I've got that hem there of 1.5 centimetres, and I'm just going to tuck my edge, so the overlocked edge or the raw edge, you don't have to overlock it, just in towards that fold that I've just made, and then I'm going to go back over with my iron. So I am taking it quite slow, just being really cautious, because of course, like I said, I don't want to go melting my lovely kimono at this stage in the game, and that starch spray will just help to keep it all in place while you're sewing. And I'm just going to put a few pins in there just to keep it in place. Can't see many questions popping up. I'm not sure whether that's because people are busy like munching the dinner, or where it all seems fairly straightforward. I think it's easier possibly than you think is this kimono, because it is just a couple of pieces of fabric. So I'm just rolling it round again, just trying to keep that a real nice neat little hem. I don't want it to be a big chunky hem. So if you did feel like the sleeves weren't quite the right length and you wanted to take quite a lot off, I would cut that extra off rather than just making like a bigger hem, because you don't want it to be too heavy, or else you'll have this big kind of heavy weight at the end of your sleeve. And the whole kind of point of this really, I think, is just to be quite delicate. So these are the type of hems that you will find like at the bottom of men's shirts and school summer dresses and that kind of thing. A really nice, neat little hem. The kind of hems that are on the bottom of your jeans as well. So really durable. So there's no fraying edges there, and just very, very neat. So I'll do this, and then before I skip off to have my lunch, I'll show you how to do an overcast stitch on a sewing machine, because if you've got a fabric that's woven, which I think most of you will if you're making this kimono, you don't want the edges to be fraying. And I know that not everybody has an overlocker. They're definitely not essential for this at all. And I've just gone with speed for this. So I've got that nice narrow little hem. So a narrow or a double hem there will refer to that. So I'm going to take the box off my machine because I'm going to be going all the way around it. And generally, you probably want to start at your underarm seam. So just in case, when you get back to the beginning, that your hem edges, your stitching line doesn't quite meet up and you've got all that over stitching, if the securing, it means that it won't be megally visible on the outside. So if you started your hem edge here where it was really obvious and you got that contrasting thread, then you might just see that big sort of block of stitches. So again, I'm aiming for really sort of quite close to this edge. So I've got this, I'm looking at the same guide, same stitch settings as I was for when I was doing that bias. So my eye focus is pretty similar. Although it's much harder doing it on this animal print rather than on the plain yellow. Almost back to the beginning now. So what I'm going to do is overlap my original stitches and do all my scoring all in one there. And hopefully my stitches will just land on where there's a nice big black blob of the animal print pattern. And it will be disguised. All that overstitching will be disguised. Yeah, it was, which was lucky. So obviously I need to repeat that with my other sleeve and then also the bottom edge of my kimono. So I'll do that same process of that really nice, neat little double hem. So if you don't have an overlocker and you are overcasting the edges, then you will need to put your sewing machine in zigzaggy mode. So for this machine, the zigzag setting is number 8. So when it comes on, it will come on with like preset settings. I'm just going to tweak them a little bit. So I'm going to keep the length of them to 5mm. So it's quite a wide zigzag, but I'm going to change the length of them. So at the moment, those stitches, those zigzag will be 2mm apart, when 2mm isn't a lot, but I want them to be really quite close. I'm going to move it down to 0.9 so that they are really close together. Let's see if I can get you right in here so you can see where I'm focusing on. My box back on. So I'm going to drop my needle. Oh, it always has a few stitches on the spot. There we go. To the right hand side, and then I'm going to tuck the edge of my kimono up to that needle. So it's actually not in the fabric, it's in sort of fresh air. And then I'm going to be sewing like that. So when the needle goes to the left, it's in fresh air. When it goes to the right, it's in the fabric. So there might be a little guide on your machine that you can follow. You could always put your seam guide or your washi tape or something like that on there. And then you know where you're focusing. So they are really close together, are these stitches. So it's going to feel like it's taking ages, but the temptation to like push it through or pull it through. But then by speeding up that process, you're going to end up stretching those stitches out. So there's going to be the big gap. So it's a bit of a boring one, but just kind of wait it out. And on fabric that's so fine like this, it does look a little bit like a rolled hem on an overlocker. So you're looking for something like that. So really quite close together stitches, and it's actually wrapping and binding around the edges. So the reason I wouldn't recommend doing this first on your pattern pieces with a sewing machine is, can you see there what it's doing to that seam allowance? It's curling it, sort of like, because the fabric is so soft and drapey, it's being pulled by the machine stitches, and it's actually taking a little bit out your allowance, probably about 1/2 centimetre. So you want to do that after you've constructed your seams, so that you're not going to lose some seam allowance on your actual kimono, but a really nice, neat little stitch. So it might not be the prettiest thing ever. If you've got any sort of stray fraying threads, just trim those off, but make sure you don't catch any of those stitches. But just a nice little technique to make sure you've not got anything fraying on the inside of your seams. So I think that's everything. Let me flip myself back round. So hopefully that has given you some confidence to sew not stretchy fabrics, slippery fabrics. Start off with a big surface space and you've got loads of room. I know that's kind of easier said than done sometimes, and try not to move it around. Invest in some starch spray, some glass head pins and some very, very annoying fine needles, and you'll get some really nice finishes. Take it slow, like I said. Be patient with the iron, be patient with the overcasting, but you'll get something that you really love to wear. So I've done mine in a crepe, in the polyester, because I hate ironing. I'm nearly done now. And I don't like things that crease, but if you like natural fibres, then the viscose is an ideal alternative to that. Then that at your end, it's just mine. Denim chambrays, broderie anglaise would be beautiful for this. Cotton lawn, some really like poplins and things like that as well. And I'm sure you could do it in heavier stuff. It'd be really nice to see on the sharing group on Facebook, everybody's take on this project. Helen McWalter said, could you do bias binding around the sleeve edges as well? Yeah, you could do, that'd be really nice. You could do it around all edges. The main purpose of the neck edge is because it's curved, and a double hem would be a mare on that. So yeah, so if you're struggling with a pattern, there is some information on the Vintage Sewing Bunny sharing Facebook group about that to make it a bit easier, but it is a free pattern from Pattern Niche, I think it's called. So I hope that you have found that useful, and I cannot wait to see your versions. So please tag us on Instagram and post them on our Facebook page, because it's lovely to see different people's interpretations, fabrics, hacks and things like that. And enjoy your weekend in the hopefully sunshine.